Actually, going into this budget cycle, I really thought we would not get a cut. And then about a week before the governor's budget address, he called all the university presidents together and sat down and talked to us about his budget. And he told us then we were going to receive a cut, but that it would be significantly less than the cuts taken by others. The rumor at the time was it would be a 1% cut, and as it turned out, it's a 2.5% cut, which for Morehead State University represents about $1 million.
Mm-hmm. Which that wasn't too bad compared to the last one. I think you said it was 6.4%.
Yeah, in the last biennial budget 2 years ago, 6.4%, it was 2.9 million. Now, but here's the problem. If you go back to 2008 and you look at the general fund appropriation, that's the money that comes from the state to support the operation of Morehead State University. It was about $49 million in 2008. And with the enactment of this budget, if it is enacted the way it's proposed, it'll be less than 41 million. We will have taken about an 8.1%, or excuse me, an $8.1 million cut, which represents about 17% of our general fund appropriation. So the problem is not just this year. It's going back, to 2008 at the beginning of the recession, and it's been significant. I mean, $8 million in our budget is a lot of money.
It's just a lot in general.
Well, it is a lot. I mean, if you had $8 million, think about your own budget, whatever it is. If you lost 17% of your budget, round it off to 20%. Yeah, I mean, it's so, the question always is, well, how do you deal with that? What do you do? I mean, how would you deal with it if somebody cut your budget 17%? We wouldn't want you to drop out of school, and that happens sometimes to our students, right?
Mm-hmm.
They get big increases in tuition or something, they have to change their plans.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a stressor for me and everybody here.
So you think it will affect you much? Like, will you have to have a tuition, like a hike in tuition or anything?
Yeah, we will. Well, let me give you the companion part to the story. So we've had a cut of $8.1 million since 2008 to our general fund appropriation. In addition to that, that's not the whole story. We've had rising fixed and unavoidable cost increases since 2008. Let me give you some examples. So we have about 1,100 people that work at the university. We pay 75% of their health care costs. We pay a significant portion of their retirement system costs. We have increases in our utility bills, just like you would at home. The heat, the water, all those things continues to rise. Our insurance costs continue to rise. In addition to that, every time we have a tuition increase, we take about 30% of the money that comes in from tuition and we apply it towards scholarships. So we've seen a tremendous increase in our scholarship budget. We've seen an increase in tuition waivers. In other words, the people that come to the university from someplace else that don't have to pay. Many of those are mandated by the General Assembly. So from 2008, when we've seen a reduction in our budget from the state of 8.1 million, we've also seen an increase of about $20 million in rising fixed and unavoidable costs. So put the two together, 20 million plus 8, roughly you got $28 million deficit we've been running since 2008. What have we been able to do to deal with that? Well, we've tried to be more efficient. We've moved from burning coal to natural gas. We're putting energy control systems in all of our buildings to better control the heat and cooling in the buildings. You see many more electric vehicles on campus. We've outsourced some of the work that's done on campus. We have consolidated some units, both on the academic and the non-academic side. We have not filled vacant positions at faculty or staff and covered them with other ways. So we've done a lot to be more efficient. The net result, however, is still $28 million in cuts and rising fixed and unavoidable. And tuition in that same period has gone from about $2,400 a semester to about $3,400-ish a semester. So it's a significant increase for our students. That tuition increase, though, the net of that only yields $24 million. So in the whole $28 million, we've increased net revenue and tuition for $24 million. So we're still operating at a net budget deficit in that category of $4 million. And that's been very significant for us to try to continue to do a good job in education. So this budget just continues that sort of that downward spiral. So that's the negative part of the budget. Now, there are some good things in the budget, but from a student perspective then, back to your question, will we have a tuition increase? Sure we will. Because the Commonwealth of Kentucky has basically said to us in public education, we're going to continue to reduce the support that we provide to higher education, and you can go ahead and tax the students and the families more by increasing your tuition. That's really what's happening. And until and unless we change that plan, tuition's going to continue to rise at our public colleges and universities, and it's very unfortunate, you know. Now, the good news at Morehead State is not many students pay full tuition. Do you pay full tuition?
No, I luckily have a scholarship.
You have a scholarship, right. Do you have a scholarship? You do. So you're two examples, and the bottom line is many of our students are on scholarship or some form of financial aid, a grant. 52% of our students get Pell Grants, right? That means that financially their families don't make high dollars, and so they qualify for federal Pell Grants. Those you don't have to pay back. A grant is something that comes to you as a grant, and you don't have to pay it back. The majority of our students come with KEYS money, which is the Kentucky Educational Excellence Scholarship, on average $1,900 a year. We double that for our students. So the reality for our students is while tuition is increasing, we scholarship a significant portion of the tuition costs for our students. But tuition's still going to increase. I mean, that's the sad reality of this picture. Well, it is very difficult. I spent Tuesday this week in Frankfurt. I met with 9 different legislators. There are 138 of them in Frankfurt, 38 in the Senate and 100 in the House. My goal between now and April is to meet with every single one of them and tell the story. And this is, I mean, I'm telling them the same story I'm telling you. You know, keep cutting the budget. We keep having rising fixed costs as we add to the burden of our students, and yet we're still operating in a deficit position. This is not a happy plan for the future, and the General Assembly has to decide they're going to raise revenue. They've got to put more money into higher education because it is what lifts families and individuals out of their current situation, gives them opportunities and hope for a different future. It's the greatest investment a civilized society makes in its people's education. And somewhere along the way, we've lost track of that. And I think that is a travesty. We need to get their and the citizens' attention back on that issue.
Do you think like the focusing, like he's putting a bunch into P through 12, school, do you think that will like help people come back to education?
Well, it's helpful. I mean, what the governor did was he initiated a 5% across the board cut for most government agencies. Now, he did exempt a few, but we won't talk about them. Most of them got a 5% budget cut. And then he said to higher ed, by the way, we're only going to cut you 2.5%. So, okay, that's good. We could have been cut 5%. We appreciate that. But think about what the message is. For the last 9 years that I've been president, the message has been, in Kentucky, we want a seamless system of higher education, P through 20, right? From preschool all the way through college. That's what we've been talking about, a seamless system. In this budget, the governor has chosen to say, well, P12 is one thing, and the rest of you over here, you're something else. I thought we were all working at this together, and I don't think it's helpful to separate out post-high school from the P12. The reality is, while it's very important to restore the funding to K-12, and I fully support that, that's extremely important. The reality is, though, you graduate from high school and you don't go on to college, your future is very dim. We know that factually. A student with only a high school education will learn more than a million times less than the student with a baccalaureate degree earns in a working lifetime. So it doesn't make any sense to stop with high school. We've got to continue to put money into post-secondary, whether it's associate degrees or baccalaureate degrees. That's the ticket to success and to prosperity. Well, we're all in the same boat in a sense. I mean, when they issue a 2.5% cut across the board for higher ed, Western Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky, Northern, we're all taking the same cuts. Now, I suppose it could affect different institutions differently. I mean, some are larger than we are, some are smaller than we are. But the fact of the matter is, every institution of higher education since 2008 has had their general fund appropriation cut about the same amount as ours. They're almost 18%. So, you know, we're all operating from that situation, and we're trying to dig ourselves out of a deep hole, and it's just tough to do. The only way we can do it is we could reduce the programming we offer on campus, right? We could say, we're no longer going to do a bunch of these things. We could lay a bunch of people off. We've chosen not to do that at Morehead State University. I've taken the position that maintaining our people is the most important priority that we have, and I've lived by that creed for the last 9 years. Now, we have eliminated some programs, we've consolidated some things, but there's not been enough money in that to make up for the net deficit that we find ourselves in. And then we could keep going back to tuition, because that is a revenue source that we don't have absolute control over, but we have some control over. I mean, students don't want to pay more, I know that. But if we're going to talk about tuition, we need to have an honest conversation about tuition. I mean, how many students at Morehead State University pay full tuition? Very, 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 very few, right? We discount. How do we discount? Scholarships, grants, and all that. In fact, if you look at the data from fall of last year, when the average student was billed for tuition about $3,400 or $500, the average student, full-time student, not part-timers, but the average full-time student at Morehead State University last fall billed about $3,500, and they actually paid about $77 for tuition. So we're still, I mean, we're still an affordable place, but unless the Commonwealth of Kentucky makes it a priority to fund the general appropriation, that part of the budget, it's going to continue to rely more on tuition, which makes it hard for families. Yeah, it does factor in. That's a really important question. So tuition's only part of the total cost of the education, right? We have almost 3,000 students that live on campus, and the cost of the education is, if you take tuition here, and I'll use round numbers, it's about $3,500 a semester, right? That's $7,000 a year. And if you look at the cost of housing and a meal plan, it's about equivalent to the same thing. So if you're looking at the total cost of an education at Morehead State University now, it's about $7,000 a year in tuition and about $7,000 a year for room and board and books and all that goes with it. So that's about $14,000. Now, remember, we discount heavily on the tuition side. We've talked about that already. But we don't discount on housing unless you get a scholarship. Some of our scholarships do provide housing, as the two of you would know, but not as many. And we don't discount meal plans, although students have choices there, right? You can take a 13-meal plan or a 5-meal plan or whatever you choose to do, but you still have to eat. So the rising cost to the student in housing, for an example, as we've renovated housing, and since I've been here, we've been very aggressive to renovate our housing. Started with Nunn Hall, then went to Alumni Tower, then East Manon, Manon Tower, East Manon, West Manon, and we're finishing up on Manon Hall right now. So we will have renovated 6 halls since we started in 2007 and spent about $28 million. That $28 million is coming out of your pocket as a student that lives in the residence hall and is paying for a room, because what we've had to do is increase the cost of housing slightly. Now we've tried to be reasonable about it. 6 to 8%, I think, is what those initial increases were. I think it's still a good bargain, and of course the students have responded very well. Pleased with what we've done in the halls, a much more appropriate environment to live in, and we're going to continue to do renovations. We have the next really big hall that we have to consider is Cartmel, and we have plans to build 600 new beds on campus beginning next year. So we're going to continue to improve the residential living on campus. It is a bunch. But see, we've got 400 students in Waterfield this year. Waterfield is an outdated hall. We really, our plan is to tear it down. We build 600 new beds. Well, we already need those 400 that are in Waterfield because we're going to tear it down. And then it gives us about 200 beds that are a little more flexibility. We will probably ultimately take down Butler and maybe Cooper. We just have to see. But we've got the net has to be about 3,000 beds. We're not going to try to grow the on-campus enrollment more than that, but we think we could level out at 3,000 pretty comfortably.
Well, that's cool. So you're going to
We are indeed. So, and it's coming. We hired an architectural firm. It was announced earlier this week. They're going to be working on this, on the design part of this, and our goal is to actually start construction this year in 2014. The location of that the facilities, and actually there's going to be 3 buildings the way we envision it right now, will be just below the recreation center in those big parking lots, you know, adjacent to Alumni Tower. That's where those halls will go. And where it was before your time, but Regents Hall was in that location. Previously, we tore that hall. There were 2 halls there that we tore down, Regents and Wilson Hall, to create those parking lots. And so that's where those structures are going to go. Oh, and while we're talking about it, we're going to build a parking garage. How about that? Yeah.
That's awesome.
When we tear Waterfield down, we're going to build a parking garage on that site for about 350 cars and new food service facility for students. Move you out of the basement of Alumni and create a really nice food service place for our students. Right. So, but you're going to have to pay for that, right? I mean, there's no free lunch. The Commonwealth of Kentucky gives no money for those kinds of facilities. We have to say we've got a revenue stream. So the revenue stream for us will be meal plans and parking fees is where that money comes from. So there's some good news in the budget, which we can talk about. The good news is in the form of some of these projects we've asked for that the governor put in there. But on the tuition side, it's tied to that general fund appropriation cut.